And I'll just read through the list just to be official. So if you could say aye or raise your hand in attendance. So Dean.
Aye.
Ashley.
Present.
Myself, present. Carrie. Andrew.
Present.
Janet.
Here.
John.
Here.
Jennifer.
Present.
Margaret or Meg.
Here.
And Glenn and Michael are not here. And then Donald.
Here. Here.
And then Kate is not here. And then we want to welcome Judy and Pat and Fiona. So thank you all for attending. Short notice for this meeting. We were trying to get another meeting in January. There's a lot of things we need to do. And it's good that we continue our discussions, and this is a good meeting because one of the things we're going to have is Judy's going to do a presentation on the master plan committee, the roles and responsibilities, and give us more of an overview of the whole process. And we're going to go through our own schedule with that as well. If you have questions, so that is the main topic. And then also we want to have a discussion if you have any questions, and we were going to go around, maybe just ask each of you, why you want to be on the committee, and what you want to get out of it being on the committee. So again, it's just a way to maybe each of us to share what's important for us. And again, in the context of what the goals of the master plan committee is, it allows you maybe to respond a little differently than you did the first meeting. So I see we have one person, Stephen, joining us from the public.
Steve's actually starting with the town next week, so I just asked him to join us.
Okay, good. No, welcome, Steve. So with that, I will hand it over to Judy, and who has prepared a presentation. And this is a presentation that we can use as we go out and do the.
No, I'll do something shorter for you to take out.
Okay, but this will be like what we can do for taking out as we go out to groups. So thank you, Judy.
Okay.
Okay, so without a whole lot of ado, I think I'm going to just turn on screen share, because what I did is I essentially reworked a presentation that my firm developed for Citizen Planner Training Collaborative, and kind of made it Walpole. So just let me get this going. Can you all see this? Anybody want to say yes? Because I really can't see you. Right, fine.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. By the way, just as a note, I am running live transcript on this. It occurred to me, I was a bit embarrassed. We really should run this whenever we're hosting a meeting for you, because we have that technical capability, and it's just good as a disability accommodation to make sure that live transcript is running. So there's basically three parts to this. It's kind of an overview about master planning in Massachusetts, and a little deeper dive into the individual elements of a plan, and then looking at kind of roles and responsibilities. So those are the three main pieces of the presentation. I think it's important to lay out kind of what a master plan is, because not everybody knows what this is actually about. So I think the thing that's the most important thing to understand about a master plan for any community, and this isn't just Walpole or Massachusetts, it's really it's the state of the field. It's a plan for the physical evolution of your town. That's primarily what a master plan is for a town. There's a vision of the community, which is physical. It's kind of what kind of place do we want this to be? Ideally, there's a statement of shared principles. Not that everybody has to agree with everything, but there are certain core values that most people would say, yeah, that matters to us. There's a picture in the plan, in words, in maps, in imagery of what is Walpole today. And I'll look at who's probably going to be there in the future based on demographic trends. It is a plan for preservation, for growth and change. All three of those pieces are part and parcel of what constitutes a master plan. There is an action plan, which we call the implementation program. And there always should be an approach to kind of evaluating progress and figuring out how one might amend the plan so that you're not waiting 20 years to do a master plan update. But sometimes, I think I mentioned this a few meetings ago, something comes up 5 years from now that no one, despite all of our collective efforts, could see coming. And so rather than think you have to wait 20 years to update your master plan, there should be a way built into the implementation program to evaluate your progress every year and consider whether there's a need for some amendment. So these are all kind of basic pieces of a master plan. It matters to have a master plan, even though ironically in Massachusetts, it is not required for your zoning or pretty much anything else. Planning boards are directed to create a plan, but there's not a lot of legal weight given to it in terms of its effect. But it matters because it can help you think about kind of where you are going and how you might make changes to avoid costly errors in the future. How can we actually, by seeing what perhaps is coming, make decisions today that will reduce the potential for mistakes we could have avoided. It does require people to work together to balance competing interests and articulate a community's shared values. It does help to set priorities. It gives residents an opportunity to learn more about the town that they live in. You'd be amazed at things that people don't necessarily know about the town they live in, even if they've been there for a long time, because they may have sort of their particular people that they hang out with, that they socialize with or whatever, and they don't necessarily know what's going on. And certainly new people may not know the town well either. So I think the kind of community engagement process for a master plan helps everybody learn a little bit more about the place where they live. And it can be helpful to private developers who are scratching their heads down the road. Why does the town want me to do X, Y, or Z in this zoning district? You know, if your zoning is aligned with your master plan, then it can be helpful to developers and landowners to understand why the town has the policies that it does. Oops, I guess I need to do this. Here we go. So this is kind of what the process looks like. And there are iterations of this, folks. I don't want everybody to sort of get locked into there's only one way to do a master plan. But these basic pieces are part of pretty much any planning process. What we've been in for the last few months is kind of the visioning and overarching goals process, trying to get a sense of how do people in Walpole see their community? What are their aspirations for their community? What kind of challenges do they see ahead? And what kind of opportunities are there? And kind of putting all of that together to understand how people perceive their town and how they would like to perceive it in the future. There is a boatload of data collection and inventory that goes on in these plans, a lot of data gathering, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the sources that we look at when I get to some later slides. There is analysis of the data that's available. I will tell you that there are not many perfect data sources for these kinds of projects. You're really, whether you're doing this as a consultant or town staff or committees, you're kind of having to look at a lot of different types of data sources and try to make sense out of what they're telling you. And then there's always the ground truthing of the data. You know, when you hold the data sets up and you say, this is what we're seeing, does this feel like the Walpole you live in? It becomes sort of the community's way of saying, you know, yeah, that does make sense to me. I may quibble with a number or two, but overall, the profile makes sense, or no, it doesn't. So there's always this kind of looking at the data and trying to figure out if it really relates to the Walpole that you experience. Evaluating future opportunities, both for conservation and development. Towns do not freeze frame. They don't like get locked in one particular state at any given time. They evolve. Walpole certainly has evolved and it will continue to do so. What you would ideally aim for is an evolution that takes advantage of the best opportunities available. Thinking about kind of what is the preferred arrangement of land uses in the future? Where do you really want to emphasize conservation? Where is growth okay? Where is it necessary? And then, of course, preparing the plan itself, implementing the plan which I'll talk about, later in a slide, but certainly having some group that's sort of responsible for spearheading that implementation is very helpful in most towns. Monitoring and evaluation, as I said, and amending and updating the plan. So this is all process. And sometimes I wanted to just make this clear because sometimes people think when the consulting team is done and we hand you the book, you think that somehow the master plan is done. And that's really not the case. The planning process has closed at a certain point, and it is now opening up the implementation itself is part of planning. It's an ongoing iterative process. In the data collection and analysis that takes place, you're really trying to get a sense of where is this community today and how did it get to where it is. Trying to select the sources that are most relevant in a given community. I'll tell you, it's not possible to do a master plan and not look at assessors data. That's like a basic piece. And we need that to make maps. And I think the first thing anybody should ever do on a master plan before we start looking for anything else is doing a lot of mapping. Just what is the physical development of this community today? Where are its water resources? Where are its roads? What is the topography like in this town? You have to really sort of anchor yourself in the physical in order to then move on in this process. So a lot of mapping takes place. And in many cases, the data sets we're looking for are data sets that lend themselves to being depicted geographically. That's not always the case, but when we can, we try to do that. We look at all kinds of other sort of local data too, things that may not be obvious, like the Council on Aging or the Senior Center every year provides a year-end report to the Department of Elder Affairs. And so those Senior Center, the Council on Aging reports can be invaluable to master plan consultants. There's annual reports that are filed by a water department that tell you what is happening with water consumption and what kinds of users are using the most water, and are there particular wells that are getting tapped more than others. I mean, there's just a lot of local data that people don't sometimes even know exists. We look at building permits. What has been the sort of construction trend in this town? What's in front of the planning board? What's in front of the Board of Appeals? What is the sort of the development pattern looking like in this town? What are developers, what opportunities do they see? Developers typically don't pursue development for something they think is going to fail. So, why are people pursuing the particular opportunities they are? And I think throughout, because this is sort of an iterative process, you're trying to listen to the questions that people in the community ask. Because sometimes we sort of know, we have these data sets that we go after that we just sort of know we need. But then someone will ask a question, and it may be a little bit different from a question we've been asked in some other town. I think the job of the consultants as well as the committee is to being open to those questions that you've never been asked before, because someone's asking because they care or they don't understand and they'd like to know more. Sometimes we just don't have the answers to questions that come up, but often just the questions people ask will lead us to kind of chase certain kinds of data so that we know we're responding to what the community is concerned about. As part of the data mining and data analysis and the mapping and the listening to people, you're trying to understand what are this town's best opportunities. Are there underperforming commercial areas? Some people will say, well, that's a challenge. Well, it can be, but it's also an opportunity. How do you revitalize a commercial area that's not doing well? Are there outdated facilities? Some people might say, well, that's a challenge. That's a problem. I look at it and say, what can you do with this property? It's an opportunity. Where's the undeveloped land, and what's the usable undeveloped land? Are there greenway connections that can be established in a community such that you can perhaps have a well-integrated open space framework? Are there potential physical connections that perhaps people should be thinking about? You're probably not going to hear this team or most master plan teams today advocating for building more roads, but it is sort of helpful to know where there might be connection opportunities or needs in the community going forward. And then just what are the market opportunities? Again, one of the things we try to look at is what are developers proposing in this community? Why are they making those proposals? What do they see that perhaps others don't see that the market is looking for in this town. Not to necessarily take the developer's perspective, but to understand that, investment-backed decisions are being made. And we try to understand what's underneath those pursuits. Do you have, hold on a sec, I think I missed I think the slide did not. Yeah, it didn't, okay. As part of that kind of analysis of what are your opportunities and what can you do with them, things that we ask as a consulting team, no matter what town we're working in, is do you have strong and credible leadership in your town? Or is leadership really fragmented? The ability of a town to take an opportunity and run with it depends in part on the credibility and strength of the leadership that's going to be taking things forward. Who's running with the ball? And do people pay attention to that leadership? Do you have the capacity you need to pursue the opportunities available to you? Capacity exists in multiple forms. It's staff, for example. Do you have staff in the right places? Do you have the right kind of staff, or do you have enough staff? What kind of funding do you need to take advantage of certain opportunities? And do those things exist? And if they don't, how can you get them? I don't know if I've ever had this conversation with you folks. I'm sure I had it with Pat at some point or another. But the first thing we do when we start a master plan process, before we even start asking for data, we're looking at the town and thinking, what can this community do? What is the capacity of this community? Because if we don't ask that question, we could end up giving you a master plan that has no prayer whatsoever of ever being implemented, because we've overestimated the town's capacity to do certain things. So we try to always get a handle on what is the capacity in this town, in leadership, in staffing, in funding, in infrastructure. What is there to work with? Do you have the political will to work with neighboring towns on what may be regional opportunities? Sometimes the opportunities that are available to a town really hinge on good regional relationships. Do you have those? Do you have responsible developers? Do you have people who actually work with your community to do quality development? And does the town government have good relationships with property owners in the community? Because the owners of those properties are one day going to become either opportunities or significant challenges for your town. There has to be a way in the plan to resolve kind of what I would call deal breaker disagreements, or at least a plan to resolve them going forward. And I think it's important to put this in here because, ideally we'd love to see at the end of every master plan, there is a kumbaya and everybody just is in love with this plan and agrees with every single thing in it. And they're gung ho. That is not usually the case. Usually what happens is there are these core things that are ready to move forward. There are sometimes things we call low-hanging fruit that would not be difficult to do and you should just do them. There are things that are big disagreements. And in a perfect world, a wonderful world, we would be able to resolve those in the master plan process. And naturally, we hope to do that. If we can't, sometimes what you have to build into the master plan is this town wasn't ready to make this step or wasn't ready to resolve this issue. These are things the town's going to have to do on a going forward basis as part of master plan implementation to continue to address and work toward a resolution of X issue. You try to keep those to a minimum. And some plans really don't have big deal breaker disagreements, but sometimes there is more planning work that's required. And a good example of that would be, say, in the opportunities assessment, there's a vacant public building. And so a master plan, a townwide master plan, doesn't come up with a plan to reuse the building. What it does lay out is these are the steps this town needs to take to pursue a redevelopment or a reuse of a building. So sometimes there's more planning work that's involved because the townwide master plan is really not usually too parcel specific. It's an area plan. There needs to be a policy framework for conservation and development. And, as something that's sort of, we're not going to change at all, just don't even go there because that's not going to happen. But there has to be some way to say, when we're pursuing conservation, geographically and otherwise, these are the things we're trying to address or trying to accommodate. And here in future development are the things that we're trying to address and accommodate. There needs to be also in your kind of implementation plan, when are you going to do these things? Some things, like I said, are low-hanging fruit and you just do them. People sometimes say, well, should we be doing any sort of action before the plan is done? And my view, and I think everybody on the team would say, if something is available to do now, you do not need to wait till we give you the book. You should just do it if it's kind of generally consistent with the plan. But often things that are in a master plan implementation program are things that take a little longer term, or they involve multiple steps. The plan ought to kind of lay out roughly, is something a near-term action? Is it a mid-term action? Is it a longer-term one? Is it something that's really not ripe even for programming right now, but something the town is going to have to deal with, perhaps in future monitoring and evaluation and update of this plan? So those things all need to be in there in some capacity. The implementation program in a master plan should always identify who's responsible. You know, is this something the select board should do, the planning board should do, the community and economic development department, you know, public works, who's the one who's going to take the ball and run with this? Again, what those timelines are, is it a near term, a longer term? And the kind of the next steps, like, so here's what you need to, here's the end game of what you're trying to get to. These are the things that you need to do, the 3 or 4 steps you need to take to make this action happen. And then as guidelines for just understanding how you're going to monitor the plan. There are different ways to do this. Communities have been pretty creative in the sort of approach to monitoring, but there needs to be something built in. And then clearly, what resources do you need for each of these recommendations? Sometimes that's funding. Sometimes it's simply a reallocation of staff responsibilities. Sometimes it's, you know, you need some additional consulting help beyond the scope of a master plan. If it's public building type stuff, then you need architects and engineers. I mean, the implementation program should kind of lay all that out so that you actually can move forward with recommendations. The process for making amendments to a plan is really something that you're going to want to think about. Again, so you're not feeling like you have to wait till some long-term period to amend. Having a master plan committee can be a huge help. In most towns, it is. I worry about the towns that don't have one. And the issue isn't that the planning board can't do their job or the select board or anybody else. It's that somebody becomes the kind of one, the group that spearheads implementation. They're sort of the cheerleaders, they're the organizers, they're the ones who get the different departments together that may be involved in a project that needs more than one steward, if you will. So I would just say that is really, I think you did this last time. It's not a bad idea. I think it's probably something you're going to want to consider. Sometimes through the master plan process, people kind of rise to the surface who would be really good ambassadors for implementation. And it's good to kind of keep your eyes open for who those people might be. Some towns, instead of having a master plan committee, have done some really cool alternatives. You know, some towns we work in, people are just committed out and they don't want to have another committee. And it's something I certainly can understand. But one town we worked with decided to take the approach of an annual retreat. And so rather than having a committee, they would have this once a year retreat, select board, planning board, finance committee, you know, whoever, town staff. And they would spend half a day or a day going through the master plan. What did we get done this year? Or why couldn't we do certain things that we thought we were going to be able to do? And what are the roadblocks? What do we need to do to get beyond them? And then critically, of course, do we need to amend this plan? And we've all got everybody in the room who needs to be part of that decision. What do we do? So that annual retreat is an option. Another thing I've seen done that I think is very effective is when a board of selectmen or a select board has their annual goal setting process, which then town departments all sort of set their goals for the year around. If the question every year is, what are you going to do to implement the master plan this year? Of the 5 goals you're going to set for your department, what master plan activity are you going to work on? And what that does is it kind of brings into view for everybody. It's not just the planning board. It's not just the select board. It's not just town meeting, but everybody's got a role to play. And so you kind of build capacity that way. So that's another approach we've seen short of having a master plan committee. It's really kind of the leadership that comes typically from a select board in the goal setting process for the community in the coming year. How do we get all the departments and the key boards and committees behind implementation? So I want to talk a little bit about the elements of the plan and typically what goes in them. Part of which is just sort of inventory and assessment, the basic information, policy development, and then again, kind of circling back to recommendations. So I think you all know this, but just as a review, state law, which is chapter 41, section 81D, it's in the section of the general laws on planning boards, directs planning boards to prepare a master plan. Doesn't say what happens if you don't. It doesn't say that you have to do anything that's in the plan. It's a very weak master plan statute, but it is what we have to work with. And it lays out a series of expectations, which is that there will be a goal and policy statement. There will be several elements: land use, housing, economic development, natural and cultural resources, open space and recreation, services and facilities, circulation, and implementation. Those are the core statutory requirements. And our proposal and our approach covers these. Your town did what most towns are doing today, which is expanding that list. So the items at the top of this list were in Walpole's request for proposals, and we have designed our approach to accommodate them. We need to look at sustainability. We need to look at energy and climate change and community health. So those will be kind of additional elements in your plan. We're actually kind of organizing them a little bit differently just to avoid duplication. But those are things that your town has asked for. And frankly, we see this almost all the time now. Some towns also said, we want a governance element. I remember when I worked on Dedham's plan in 2009, 2010, that was a huge issue for Dedham. It's like, on our last plan, we said we wanted to strengthen the role of the town administrator, and we never quite got there. And we think that that was a problem for implementing some aspects of our master plans. And we want to look at this time. So they specifically included governance in their scope, as did the town of Lincoln. Some communities have a downtown element focused specifically on downtown, or villages or neighborhoods. When I worked in Southborough in 2007, Southborough had a whole element devoted to their villages because it so happens that Southborough was a town that grew around villages. Some towns want an element focusing on smart growth. Where are the nodes where we should be promoting development around public transit or whatever. And then some have looked at arts and culture as a specific element. That often comes up under economic development anyway, but some towns want to put a spotlight on it. So that has also shown up in some master plan scopes, but not yours. This Venn diagram kind of lays out for you how we're packaging all of that. So when you get plan documents from us, they're going to follow this organization, for lack of a better phrase, of chapters. There is an economic section, which looks at land use and zoning, economic development, public facilities, services and energy, and transportation. Those are kind of the economic pieces. The social pieces of sustainability are addressed in your plan through the housing component, community health, cultural and historic resources, cultural and historic resource areas. You're probably recognizing most of this is coming from 4181D, and what isn't is coming from your request for proposals. The environmental leg of sustainability is natural resources, open space and rec, and climate change and resiliency. So those will be kind of the elements, if you will, in your plan. If you're kind of scratching your head saying, what the heck is an element of a plan? If you almost think about it as a chapter of the plan book, it will probably help you picture what we're talking about. So there's always goals and policies for a plan, and that's kind of part of what we're working on right now with the information from the community meeting and the survey, the Miro results, and certainly from the kitchen conversation meetings that we hope you're all going to do over the month of January. Out of all that input, we're trying to derive kind of a picture of what is this community's desired long-term direction. And what are sort of the things that you really care about? A lasting impression you would want to have your community be able to say 20 years from now, just as you want to be able to say today. These are values that matter to Walpole residents. The policies are things that identify the preferred actions that you're going to take in relation to kind of those broad goal statements. And they bring those goals to life. So there are goals that are sort of overarching for the whole plan. And then there are goals that are element specific. We're not doing element specific goals yet. That will come. But the sort of overarching ones, we are working on those right now. And those really ought to come out of the heart of this first phase of community engagement. The land use element of your plan, in my view, this is always the heart of every master plan. It's probably the one that the state law pays the most attention to. It is the only element, by the way, that the state law requires a specific map for, which I find fascinating. But anyway, there are maps, lots of maps. So what's your existing land use pattern? Where's your zoning districts and what are they? What do you have for open space today? And where are your environmentally sensitive areas? Now, of course, some of this content also relates to other elements of the plan, but these are basic things you have to know to understand a land use pattern in a community. How does your town approach permitting and development review? Districts have different requirements. How do you execute them? Are there places in town where the existing land uses don't necessarily meet the desires of the town? Is that a problem? Where does zoning not match the existing land use pattern? What are the land uses in adjacent communities? And, you know, in Massachusetts, because we're a home rule state, our towns all focus on what happens in their own borders. But trust me when I tell you that part of what constrains the challenges for every town and also opens up opportunities has to do with what's around you. So we do kind of look at what's going on around you. We can't obviously do a regional plan here, and that's not what we were hired to do. But we are kind of looking at what's going on in the neighboring towns, most of which it so happens I've worked with. So we kind of know a little bit about the region. What do you have the infrastructure and transportation components to support the kind of land use pattern that it seems that you want? Certainly that's addressed in your zoning or that we hear in the community engagement process are changes that people would like to see. And do you have the capacity to manage the change that that your zoning calls for today, or that new zoning may need to call for in order to kind of deliver the expectations of the land use element of the plan? So some of this is the inventory and existing conditions section, and some of it is like the policies that come out of that. You know, where do you have a mismatch? What do you want to do about it? Does it matter? And when you kind of agree on where development ought to occur, do you have the infrastructure and transportation components to support that plan? The housing element, I have to tell you, this is the one that's always the most controversial. I don't care what town I work in. This has been this way for 25 years. And we, you know, whether it will be in Walpole, I don't know. But the housing element always has sort of a like, what's the housing inventory in this community? What's it comprised of? What does the housing fabric tell you about who lives here? And we also look at demographic data to understand what kind of households do you have? People often want to know all kinds of stuff about population change. For housing, actually, the most important thing is household formation and household characteristics. We certainly look at both. We definitely have to look at both in a town like yours because you have a prison. So sometimes population statistics, when they're divorced from household, the population statistics will pick up the prison. So we have to look at household information to understand, okay, there's the prison factor, but then there are people who actually live here as residents. And what are they, who are they? So there's a lot of focus on the households. Are there neighborhoods or areas in town where there seems to be the most change either taking place or likely to change? What housing needs can we see down the road in your community based on demographic trends? What's your affordable housing inventory and where's the affordable housing located? What kind of housing are you going to need to meet current and future needs, dictated in part by that sort of demographic trends analysis? Do you have the capacity to meet those needs? Is the town going to need to be talking about potential changes to zoning And is there a public education piece that's going to be needed in your town to help your residents understand the connection between households, affordability, housing type, location? We don't know that that's an issue, but often public education is a factor. So it's one of the things we're going to look at. The economic development element is a combination of some demographic pieces and also the employment base. So the labor force in your community is your own residents, the people who live in your town, who either work in Walpole or work somewhere else, or they're looking for work. The labor force, anything about a labor force is about you guys. The employment-based characteristics is about what do the employers in your community do? What kind of industry do they represent? What kind of jobs do they offer? And who do they employ? Are they employing mainly Walpole people? Are they importing labor from other communities? Who are your biggest employers? What do you have in the employment-based mix in terms of goods and services available to your residents? How much kind of micro business activity is going on? A lot of employment-based statistics don't pick those things up. Self-employment it's a big deal, but it doesn't normally show up in traditional employment-based statistics. So we try to find out what's happening with business formation. What's the role of farming in your community, and is farming viable? Are there, in terms of whether it's the employment base or the labor force, are there labor training needs, workforce development needs that may exist because of an industry that has departed the region, and now you've got people who had a particular skill set and need to somehow be retooled? How do you attract businesses? What do you do to attract businesses? What tools are you using? What are you doing to retain businesses? Lots of times people want to sort of bring in business, right? Well, if you don't retain your base, actually that's a recruitment nightmare. So focusing on retention is terribly important. Are there places that need revitalization in the community in order to be successful economic nodes? Do you have the infrastructure and transportation to support the economic development, the kind of local economy that you want? And what's your approach to permitting and development review in commercial and industrial development? Natural and cultural resources, it's an inventory, of course. What do you have for land and water resources? Where are the historic and cultural resource areas in your community? Who's overseeing all that? Who oversees those wonderful natural and cultural assets? And do they have capacity to do their job? Where does it seem that you need protection the most for the resources that you care about or the resources that are valuable? And what are the most effective ways to achieve that protection? Are there connections between the resource areas? This is something that we often look at. It's not a big surprise to see in older historic development patterns a connection between wetlands, upland, and where some historic patterns of development may exist. So we try to look for, are there needs within cultural and natural resource areas that perhaps would mutually benefit from some type of approach? Is there public education needed in the community to develop an appreciation and awareness of both the resources that exist and potential threats to them? Do you have the capacity to administer and enforce regulatory protections? And what state and federal resources either are you taking advantage of, or do you need to be able to take advantage of to do the job of protection and enhancement of those resources? Open space and recreation. If any of you have been on an open space and recreation committee, this is probably going to be familiar to you. But essentially, like any other element of the plan, there's an inventory. What do you have today for open space and recreation facilities? Who owns them? Are they protected or not? Who's using your recreation facilities today? Are you able to meet multiple different types of user needs with what you have? Or are there some groups that are better served than others? How is accessibility to people with disabilities working in your recreation and open space areas? Who's managing and maintaining the facilities that you have? Who's handling programming? I mean, this is all part of the sort of inventory. On the kind of needs assessment and policy development, you look at, well, what needs are there for new programs or facilities? And how do you make priorities? How do you set priorities, especially for improvements that would provide more equitable access for people with disabilities? What is the role of volunteer groups in these activities? Are there particular properties that are very important to the town that perhaps you're going to want to program into some, acquisition strategy, whether it's for protected open space or recreation needs? Are there competing uses and limitations? It's really common for us to hear, and maybe we won't hear it in Walpole, but sometimes there are competing interests between folks who are very dedicated to conservation and folks who want to see more active recreation facilities developed. So understanding whether those tensions exist in Walpole is something that we would want to know, and perhaps be able to suggest some remedies to help unify those groups. And what's your capacity to sort of manage and police and maintain the facilities and the open space areas that you have. For services and facilities, again, the inventory part is kind of, well, what do you have today for public safety, for schools, for waste management, public works, and so forth? What do you have as a municipal infrastructure with which you provide government services? Are there compliance issues at all related to any of the facilities and systems that you have? Do you have capacity limitations in any of the facilities or for the services that you deliver? What do the demographic trends in this community suggest about perhaps needs that may exist in the future for location of different types of facilities or improvements to facilities, accessibility, and so forth? Do you have enough water and wastewater capacity to support the growth plan that you maybe through the land use element have said you'd like to support, and then take pressure off of areas where you don't really want development to occur? How readily do you take advantage of state and federal resources in your town to support the facility and services system that you need today or in the future? Do you have particular areas where you have facilities that are vulnerable to some kind of natural hazard? Is there a role, or what is the role for alternative energy, and how is the town, working toward reduced dependence on fossil fuels? What is your water conservation plan, and is it working? And just what's the effectiveness of what you have today? These are all kinds of questions that we ask in developing that element. Traffic and circulation, I think it's fairly obvious what this is, but we look at not just at cars, but we're looking at all modes of transportation. Do you have safe places for people to walk, to bicycle, to drive their car? Do you have accessible routes for people who are mobility impaired? Where are your big traffic generators, and how is the sort of network designed to accommodate those stresses or demands? Where are the problems? Where are the critical traffic locations in your community? Do you have a program for sidewalk maintenance and roadway maintenance? And how's that working? Is it funded adequately? Do you take advantage of things like complete streets or safe routes to school? Are there areas in the community that would benefit from what we call traffic calming, which is strategies to sort of slow traffic down or perhaps discourage it in certain locations and direct it onto roadways that perhaps are better designed to accommodate it? Is there a good connection between the land use pattern that you want and the transportation resources that you have? And if there's a disconnect there, how do we build into the plan reducing some of those disconnects so that the systems all make sense and work together? Are there regulatory issues that perhaps should be looked at in transportation design? And do you have the capacity to carry out physical improvements that may be needed in your transportation system over time? The implementation program, the best actions you can have are they have a tangible outcome, so people can clearly say, oh yeah, we met that. We actually did that action. That's done. Or some identifiable completion. That should be clear in the plan. Are there strategies that, you're already doing? You probably don't need to put those in your implementation program unless there's some real, strategic reason to do so. But otherwise, it just clutters up the plan. The strategies ought to have action words, things that say support or explore or consider. They're really policy statements more than actual actions. I'll be the first to tell you that sometimes towns can't get beyond those words. And we're not going to, penalize you for that. But you ought to try to sort of get to real actionable words so you can have something that people can say later, yes, we actually did accomplish those actions. The actions that are in the implementation program ought to relate back to the goals. You ought to be able to go to an implementation program and say, okay, I know why that's here. That's here because of this goal. That relates directly to this goal. So we try in the design of our implementation matrix to show you what those connections are. And again, a process for updating and evaluating the plan, having a committee or some other mechanism to make sure that the plan, quote, does not sit on the shelf. It's the most common question we are asked in any one of these projects. And of course, the answer is, if you don't want your plan to sit on the shelf, you have to implement it. Things to include in the implementation program, the specific actions, a time frame for completion, who's going to do it. A little bit of, assignment of responsibilities is a good idea. If there's things that involve public facilities, a master plan scope is not where we try to figure out what it's going to cost you to expand your police station or your senior center or whatever, but we would certainly say you're going to need funding to achieve X. And then a schedule for amending your zoning to make it consistent with the plan also ought to be in the implementation program. Lots of maps. You can overdo it with maps, but maps are important. The map should all be clear. Where did the data come from to make this map? The maps, it may be basic stuff to you, but you should look for these things. Like, is there a legend? Is there a scale bar? Is there a north arrow? Are the data sources used to create the plan named on the plan? There should be a data source list. The symbology on the map should be readable to anybody. Not everybody loves to read maps. The maps ought to be clear. Who prepared the maps? It's typically going to be our firm, or Beta Group would be probably the main ones doing mapping for this, but it ought to be clear who did it. We're going to give you at the end of the project any GIS data sets that we used to create maps. So those files all ought to be named in a way that someone knows what they are and can make use of them in the future. So let's talk a little bit about just you folks and us and town staff. The basic job description of any master plan committee is you are the ambassadors for this project. You are the ones, you're the face of the master plan in the community. You are the ones who are going to lead this process. Now, naturally, in the end, the planning board has a unique statutory role, but you guys were formed for a reason. And your job is really to kind of lead this process with support from us, with support from staff, but you're the face of this plan, and it's a terribly important role. At some point along the way, you will no doubt be advisory to the planning board, the select board, or the finance or advisory committee, or others who have a role in master plan implementation. The outreach, we can create flyers, we can give you materials, we can design meetings, that's our job, but the actual face of outreach must come from the master plan committee, because people know you, they don't know us. So they want to know why would I go to some meeting? Well, it's because I know John, he invited us to a meeting, and if he says it's a good meeting to go to, I guess I'm going to go to a meeting. It's a role that is unique to the master plan committee. It's probably the most important thing that you will do. Well, one of the most important things that you will do in this process. As you work together more, I don't know how well you all know each other, so it's kind of hard for us to guess, but it's really important for you guys as a group to establish basic trust and respect for each other, because you're going to run into decisions that you have to make where everybody may be on the same page or everybody may not be. And there's got to be a way, kind of an understanding of, even if we disagree, we kind of all have the town's best interests at heart. We just define those best interests differently. You need to be able to work together, because there are going to be times when we have to ask you a question like, guys, here's this data. These are these data sets. It's what it's telling us. You have some choices here. What do you want to do? And the decision then goes to you folks to perhaps guide some of the policy development, understanding, of course, that it's our job to give you information that will help you. If you're on this committee because you were chosen to represent boards, some other board or committee, it's really important for you to keep them informed. You may know this anyway, but I've worked with committees where people just kind of didn't dawn on them, like, oh, I have to go back and tell the Economic Development Committee what we're doing. So that in the end, when the plan is in front of the planning board for adoption, you don't have members of the Economic Development Committee or the Housing Committee or the library trustees coming saying, I didn't even know this plan was going on. So keep your boards informed. Attendance is critical, as you can see tonight. When you have a quorum problem, it's an issue. So, making a commitment to the committee is just terribly important. I certainly understand that things come up in people's lives, and sometimes you just can't make a meeting. I'm on a town board in my own community. I'm on the ZBA. Sometimes I can't make a meeting, but you certainly make a commitment to try. Helping us or Pat or anybody else in town find information that you may know about that we don't have access to. So if you have, if you know of information that might be helpful to us, making sure that we get it or telling us how to get it is just always deeply appreciated. Sometimes we may ask you to be a sounding board. We're hearing conflicting things about a problem in the community or a need. What do you guys know? And we would take your counsel very seriously. Reviewing and draft documents that we give you. We talked a little bit about this at the previous meeting. You're going to be getting draft documents from us. We're going to want comments from you so that we can make them better. Generally, wordsmithing comments are not helpful, but factual corrections are. Try to reach consensus so that you don't have to take every single decision to a vote. If you are a committee that can kind of look at each other, whether it's on Zoom or in a room, and kind of know, yeah, we agree with it. We can, this makes sense to us. Consensus is great. It's the best way to function when you can do it. But you still want to have basic procedures also that you're going to fall back on. Like if we do need to take a vote on, say, a policy statement, is it going to be a simple majority? Do we want a supermajority? Just having that said up front so that no one's caught later by surprise. Can bigger decisions, whatever those may be a different quantum of vote versus a less significant decision? Those are just all things I think you want to be thinking about as a committee so that you're prepared to make decisions. Town staff, Pat has been fabulous. I would say we all feel this way on the consulting team. Your town departments have been phenomenal with us. I don't always go into a master plan process in a community where I am greeted with the enthusiasm and just the camaraderie that we have seen with your town departments. So I just need to tell you that we have been very impressed. Town staff provide data, and God knows they have. Giving professional advice or consultation to you, to us, they're going to know aspects of the community better than we do. We're asking questions. They give us advice. They give us information. Helping with meeting logistics. Of course, Pat has been doing this, getting agendas up, scheduling, arranging remote technology, which it's perfectly fine to use our Zoom accounts. I don't care. It's fine. But making sure that it's set up. And then facilitating coordination and communication between the committee and us and other town boards that need to know what's going on. That kind of coordination role, it's so good to have a staff person who's handling that. And then just kind of managing the contract. I need to know who to send my invoices to. I do. Sometimes when you start a process like this, you have to kind of sort that stuff out, but it was very well handled in Walpole. Our job is, you hired us, or the town hired us to do a lot of research, to gather data and analyze it to the best of our ability, to do the writing, the mapping, the report production. We do a lot of interviews. We have to, talk to people and say, look, we've looked at these data sets. This is what it's telling us. Does this sound right? Do you have data that we don't have that might help to explain what we're seeing? Fact checking, the community engagement plan. So we need you for outreach to make sure that the community understands their opportunities to participate. Our job is to kind of lay out in the plan what those pieces will be. We design meetings, we facilitate them. We sort of schedule, through Pat, through Phil or whatever, coordination in advance of a meeting so we all know what to expect. We're advisors to you. We're not telling you what to do. We're advisors to you and to town staff based on our professional experience and what we see. We package the draft and the deliverables and all those materials. And I would just also say throughout, all of us, in trying to reconcile what we see, we're guided by our own professions, policies, and code of ethics, and that would be the American Planning Association. So that's kind of us. State law does not prescribe an adoption process for a master plan, which is remarkable. It just says the planning board shall prepare and periodically update. But certainly the plan ultimately needs the planning board to adopt it or approve it. Town meeting in some communities is asked to accept or adopt a plan. Most towns do not do that, but some do. The planning board, before taking a vote, probably ought to have a process for gathering comments, whether written or, in person, and holding some kind of meeting, if not a formal public hearing, then at least one that's well posted and advertised. After the plan is adopted, it gets submitted to the Department of Housing and Community Development. They are kind of the official repository of master plans in Massachusetts. So that's kind of how that process ultimately closes out. And that was kind of a lot to cram into a single presentation, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions you guys have. I could leave this up or take it down. Phil, what would you like me to do? Do you want me to leave the slides up for any reason or just take them down so we can all see each other?
Yeah, Judy, there's a question whether you could share the slides too later. You post
They're already in your folder. It's a PDF file. Yeah,
Good.
they're already there.
Yeah.
The one slide, Judy, that you had the 3 circles that show the societal, economic, and whatever the third one is.
Environmental.
Yeah. You put that back up?
Sure.
While Judy's doing that, I just want to note that Mike and Glenn joined us during the presentation. So thank you, Mike and Glenn.
So
A minute to get back.
basically, I guess I would just like to say, Judy, that I have maybe a unique role here as kind of a 50-year town official who's never been an employee of Walpole and a senior citizen. I have a particular experience and perspective on planning and on the community. And just so we understand, I mean, essentially, this isn't the Soviet Union. We don't have a master plan for everything. This is a free society. It's a constitutional government. We have free will. We have property rights. And actually, the town of Walpole, when you keep saying the town of Walpole is the taxpayer property owners of Walpole. The town employees that are the government workers of Walpole may have decided many things in drafting an RFP. I think probably Ashley was involved in that, and speak on behalf of themselves as far as what the town government employees think about how much planning there should be and how much control there should be and how much regulation there should be and how much development there should be of these different components that are on this chart. But that is all, just to put it in perspective, that's all coming from one corner, which is the government, consultants, and employees, not from the community and the citizens and taxpayers themselves. So I would just say, not as a devil's advocate, but I would just say that I'm going to have concerns when you say such things as we have to figure out the capacity of how far we can develop the town and plan it. I happen to know for certain, I've been over a half a century with the people in every church and group in this town. Many people moved to this town because it was a quiet bedroom community. They never had any intent of having Walpole develop door to door or wall to wall. They are not interested in having their lives totally planned by or managed by the town government employees. And there are components of public service and government service which our town government is charged to fulfill. And some of them are within these charts and some of them go beyond. I would say that just hypothetically, possibly half of the things that you rattled off are the responsibilities of the U.S. government. We all pay taxes to the federal government of the United States of America. And many of these areas of responsibility fall within the bailiwick of federal government responsibilities and activities, not the domain of the local government of the community of Walpole. And I would say that another portion of this belongs to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where we pay heavy taxes, and particularly in transportation, some of the issues you were focusing on is very much the responsibility of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, not the community of Walpole, as is Norfolk County has a piece of the pie of responsibility.
I think we lost you, John.
All right.
All right.
We're not really responsible, in my view, of planning or managing many of these worldly challenges like global warming or climate change or what have you. My perspective is that we're going to listen to the residents, the homeowners, and the taxpayers of Walpole, not hear from the town employees. There's some of the communities you've encountered have certain issues, and I respect and consider that. Walpole is somewhat unique, and you will come to learn, for example, 55% of the land area of Walpole is open space. Walpole probably bought more public lands for protection than any town you can think of. We bought Adams Farm, we bought Jarvis Farm, we bought Turner's Pond. We purchased all kinds of open space areas and created also permanent open space along with the Norfolk Aggie School.
John, what's your point?
I'm giving a perspective as to what we just heard. My point is that I'm not an advocate of big planning and planning everything. I'm an advocate of planning the things within our town budget that we're responsible for and the fiscal operations of the community as you defined.
So John, I don't see anything here that was mentioned that doesn't fall under the planning of Walpole. And I think it would be unfair to think that, the town has professionals who work for the town who bring a certain amount of expertise, that we're paying them for that expertise to help us, run a very efficient town and also to look for long-term needs. So I understand you may have some philosophical differences, but probably this is not time to go further into it.
It's called fiscal responsibility. The town when you talk about affordable anything, housing or anything else, the affordability comes from how much the town makes you pay to live here. And the town is directly involved in the operations of town government of what is affordable and what's livable for senior citizens and the rest of the town. It's not housing builders, it's the town of Walpole and how much money they're spending and how much taxes they're charged.
I think there
are parameters. Please let me finish. There are parameters on the planning and on our budget and our ability to do these things. And I would say, I think you're going to find that many people do not want everything planned and plan to capacity the development of Walpole. I think the town, and I'm just educating you people actually, that the town of Walpole since 1969 has grown less than 1% a year. It's a very slow growing town, and that's on purpose. And the people who move here expect that. They're not interested in trying to develop the whole place next month. Okay.
So John, I think this might be for a further discussion. There's other people who probably want to speak as well.
I am going to speak up, Phil. That's my role here. And I'm not going to be talked down by staff or consultants or anybody else. I think I know as much and more about the town than anybody that is in the room.
I have to say, I think your perspective, though, is somewhat skewed, and I think you're looking at this in a way that doesn't really reflect what we're here for, the master plan. I don't think anybody's talking about building out the capacity of everything. I think we're talking about what first of all, the whole perspective of this committee is to ascertain what the town as a community, not just one segment, but all segments want. And I think that's very much the core of what our function is. And then second, looking at, I mean, Walpole is never the same. If you're looking at somebody who moved here in 1960 and they would say, I don't want anything to change, most of us would not be in Walpole right now. But let's talk more about this another time. Understand.
Yeah. All right. My last point would be, Phil, that the state agenda for this is 7 items, and we have a circle here of 14 items. So we've expanded the domain of what the state was expecting for a master plan into something that the Walpole staff has asked for beyond that. All right. That's really
okay.
That's
People should be very clear. The state has the 9 elements. 7 of them are really the core of what's here. The town really only added 2. And the 2 that they added were just reflection on the fact that the world has changed since the state law was written, and it would be irresponsible not to include something like sustainability. But we can, there'll be plenty of time to talk about this more. I think maybe other people have questions about Judy's presentation. I really want to thank Judy for putting this together and for giving us this, really a detailed description of what our role is.
I see Ashley has her hand up, Phil.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify something so that it's clear for the record and everyone on tonight, and if anyone's watching. The RFP that was drafted went on a public agenda and was approved by the select board. So there was an opportunity for folks to give comments on that. It's not something that staff just wrote in an office and decided to say, okay, this is what the RFP is. So there was a public approval process for that. And also what I heard tonight, which I think is really important, is that this plan is about identifying areas that we want to protect and save from development, and identify those areas that are important to Walpole to protect. So, and part of that is having a plan for where we do want development to go. So I just wanted to clarify that this wasn't something that staff just wrote by themselves and sent out. It did go through a public process.
Well, it's a nice comment. I would say one thing back to that is that part of our analysis could be also looking at the functions of government. For example, in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, the Midwest states, they all have county services for fire, police, public safety. They have regionalized shared services in emergency healthcare, et cetera. And they're much more economic as far as the tax costs to residents when communities within 5 miles, a 5-mile circle of each other, instead of having 8 fire departments, have one department with 3 buildings or something. So there are areas of planning too that can actually scale down government and make things more efficient for citizens by reducing regulations and letting the free market system and the free social system work, instead of having somebody plan your housing and plan your lives for you.
John, I just want to say, I think this is a further discussion, but I think this whole premise that, Walpole is controlling everyone's lives and planning everything. I mean, much of the planning, inspections protect homeowners when they have buildings built, housework done. I mean, so much of what goes on in regulation is actually to protect the town, protect people, and make sure that we don't have a hodgepodge of development, or, we've been through a time when natural resources have been destroyed. Everyone likes Adams Farm. So I think, I think your blanket statements,
These are food for thought.
Right.
You want?
Okay, moving on.
Moving on.
Do other people want to speak?
Oh, I just wanted to thank Judy for that presentation. I thought it was really helpful to see what types of questions we're going to be asking after we have the data, because the data collection, they're very open-ended, they're very broad. It's very helpful to see sort of where we're going. I just also wanted to reiterate, and one of the things she said is that we should, all treat each other, including the consultants and the town staff that's on this, with, respect and listen to each other and really be careful. We all come in with our own views. When we say things like the town of Walpole, we're actually talking about our own perspectives, unless we have them, and really be open to what the data shows us. And it may very well, bear out some of the things that some people are saying. It may contradict what they're thinking. And I just would encourage everyone to sort of approach this process with as an open mind as possible. That's it.
No, thank you, Jen. Does anyone else have a question about the?
You're all so quiet.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to hear about all this. I'm ready to go. I want to look at the maps.
The maps are fun.
And I think, just to highlight, what Judy's saying, that the importance of our role of being ambassadors, of trying to go out and understand what people are looking for, and then going out and explain to people, what some of the options are, and being the voice of this very important process, because, planning is so important in this world where so many things are dependencies and understanding priorities. So this is an opportunity for Walpole to really look ahead and meet the needs of what we find that we need to do. And so it's very important in that regard. Andrew?
I have a quick question for Judy and Patrick that I'm sure we can resolve through email. And it follows up on what Jen just asked about, or what Jen just made a comment on about the data and letting the data speak for itself and keeping an open mind. Judy, in your presentation, you mentioned how assessor's data is central to any master plan process. And I know Patrick works a lot with GIS and with our assessor's database. Dennis Fliss does a great job at the town hall as the head of assessing. And I'm just wondering, could we get access to the raw assessor's data that is publicly available in terms of units, assessments for those structures, assessments for the land, the acreage, and so forth? If we could get access to the raw data, that's my first question. And then my second question is, I wasn't here last week for the meeting. I did watch the entire video, and I know that we're still collecting information, public input for this first round of public input. We're doing the meetings in a box, but I'm just wondering if the raw, again, what I'm harping on here, the common theme is raw data. If the raw text responses from the surveys, anonymized, of course, if those could be shared with members of the committee, because it would be interesting in both cases, whether it's the assessor's database or the text analysis, the text responses from the surveys, it would be interesting to me, at least, to do some research on that raw database.
Well, as for the assessor's database, that's a public document, and all we need to do, probably the easiest way to do it, Pat, you and I can talk about this offline, but we can very easily just export from the assessor's GIS map the whole database that is available to map. So anything that's in that database can be represented geographically. We can just export that and, put it in your box if you want. You have to be careful with it, but Pat, were you going to say something? Or?
No, I was just going to say, most of that information is publicly accessible right now on both Munimapper and Vision. But if you're looking for just an Excel, like a working data dump or something like that, it's not a problem.
I do Munimapper, and I do the assessor's database a lot on the town website. Those are great for kind of one-off lookups, but I want the full data dump.
That shouldn't be an issue.
Thank you. And then for the text responses of the survey. Yeah,
we can do that. I think we certainly can. The information is available to you. You just have to be careful because there's no easy way to quantify it. So the risk, the only concern we ever had was if people see a statement that they agree with, and then it's sort of easy to not see the 50 statements that they don't agree with. There's a risk here, but the information is yours. We're going to work with it to the best that we can. You're either going to agree with the way we interpret it or you're not. We don't lie, but certainly we can. Fiona and I can talk about how best to make that happen.
Again, I'm not asking for you to do any extra work, just the raw responses. And I'm sure we'll be prudent, we'll be judicious in our analysis, not to cherry pick phrases that fit our narrative, fit our viewpoints, but, actual text analysis that represents people's responses. from simple as a word cloud to something more sophisticated. So thank you.
Yeah, we actually have word clouds already. But you're welcome to it. It's like, yeah, we have nothing to hide. I mean, it's just a question of what are you going to do with it? But you can have it. We'll put it in your Dropbox. It's fine.
Looking at the time, I'm wondering if we could move on to the kitchen conversations item on our agenda.
Sure. Whatever you want is fine.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So first, did everyone see in the Dropbox that Judy has prepared a presentation that goes with the package itself to use?
There's also a video, and I'm trying to figure out how best to get that. I don't think we haven't put the video in their Dropbox, have we, Pat?
Not yet, no.
I can do that. There's a video. You can just open it up. You can watch it. And so having the video, I think, helps a little bit. Then you're not just looking at slides that don't have a voice. But you can do either way. You can just look at the slides if you don't listen to my voice for another hour, or you can watch the video. But we tried to put something together to help you if you're going to do one of these meetings. And I hope that everybody can at least do one. It's amazing what you learn from people when you go out and you ask these questions. People that maybe you see all the time and you think you all think the same way or agree with each other, and you start asking questions and you find out that people come from very different perspectives, and that's good.
And it's going to be incumbent on us to go out there with offering the conversations and getting other people maybe to do it to their communities. As we talked about at the last meeting, we want to reach every segment of the population that we can. So the starting place for that will be us going out and seeing, can we get it out to more groups? Are there segments of the population where we haven't reached? Can we find ways to do that? So we have till January 31st to actually do the additional conversations. We have the list. So there is everyone should have the link. There's a list of the organizations and communities that we could go out to. Now, I did make some updates, Ashley. I put two columns. I put one column, the type of organization, and then I put the organization as being the two major sort columns. And John, I noticed you put a number of things out there. We may want to just go and move some things around. I wasn't sure how some of the data fit in the columns. And then what I did is I put about 20 other organizations out there and just brainstorming, and I invite others to do that as well. And then what's important, what we want to do is have ambassadors, people from the committee who would be the lead person reaching out to those groups, maybe doing the conversation, kitchen conversation, or maybe finding somebody in the group who could do it. And we wanted that to be an ambassador that could continue beyond this. So, because we want to keep the contact with these different groups, different communities as we go forward, because there's going to be new opportunities to get content from them. We have another forum coming up where that will be looking through the results of Judy's team's analysis of where we are, and they're looking for verification of that. So again, having us be the ambassadors, having connections to the community is very important to understanding what people are looking for.
And I would also say, if you're not comfortable hosting a community conversation meeting because it's just not your thing, maybe you could find someone who is comfortable. Maybe somebody who just loves to do that kind of thing. But I guarantee you're going to reach people that probably were not reached any other way. Or you increase the potential for that in any case.
Yeah, I think we have to be flexible in the structure too. Some of these things, particularly the computerized structure of responses in boxes like Phil was just mentioning, I may not want to spend hours trying to figure out some cockamamie cloud idiosyncrasy that I have to check off a right box. So, I think you have to be receptive to maybe getting some written responses and more mundane levels of communication that if you want to transfer and put into your electronic machinations, you can do so.
Yeah. So if anyone doesn't want to update the Google Sheets, please let me know. I don't mind updating it for you. And then as far as the actual conversation, the kitchen conversation, most of it's very interactive and just writing things down. And then just one person needs to be the recorder to report back the results. But again, if anyone needs help doing that, I'm sure there's others here, we can help do that.
Yeah, and if you're going to do one and you have a question, you should all have my email by now. And if you don't, I'll put it in the chat. Just let me know if you need help. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, no, I don't mind doing one with someone if they want to have a, 2 eyes on it or whatever. So I will say I presented this to a committee meeting I was in last night, and I had 2 people who are in different communities who themselves just want to go and do the conversation. So that was
Great. That's good.
So it was good to hear, because these are people who are not very engaged in the town, because a lot of people don't have the time to really follow all of the different town boards and meetings, and we don't really have the best news coverage of town, what's going on in the town. So that's why it's really important for us to be the ones to go out there and talk to people.
So I'm looking in the Dropbox, but I don't see the slides. Maybe I'm in the wrong. I was looking at a link to the Walpole MPC Dropbox, and I see 4 folders: community engagement, master plan documents for committee review, meeting minutes, and photos. Am I in the
So
wrong?
if you open up community engagement, there should be several subfolders there, including one for tonight, 1/4/22.
Okay, I don't see that. Let me try again and refresh it.
Neither do I.
I don't see it. I see 11:17, the forum, a canceled meeting, 10:05, 10:26, and 12:28.
You know what? It just hasn't, there's a sync disconnect. That's all. Yeah, it just probably hasn't done its sync thing yet. Another piece of jargon. Sorry, Jen. But I can see it. So, if you want, I can also email them to you. Well, I may have to email you a link. I think the slides may be too big to attach to an email, but just let me know if you need something. Me or Fiona, for that matter. We're here to help. What we can't do, and I'm sure you can all understand this. We don't want to get involved in individual discussions with you guys about something, about a policy issue or something. But if you need information from us, just let us know. We've either got it or we don't. We'll give it to you. We don't bite.
So does
Thank you
anyone
so much.
else have any comments or any questions before we end? So our next meeting is January 25th at 7 o'clock, and that'll be by Zoom.
Yep.
And the thing we're looking forward to will be the next public forum. And before that, Judy will be sending out the draft.
Right.
And we will be forming those committees, and we're talking more about that at the next meeting. And by the way, thank you for your giving input. What area of interest you have, but if you haven't done that, please let me and Patrick know what areas of interest you would like to work on. So we will be forming those subcommittees to work on reviewing the draft, and those will all be done as open meetings. So more about that. But that'll be a very important step for us to make that review and give feedback back to Judy. What they're looking for is to make sure that they have captured the right facts, the right interpretation, that their sense about what they've learned from talking to the different sources that they had, that corresponds to what we're really seeing. So they're looking for that validation. So with that, unless anybody else has another comment.
Motion to adjourn?
And who made that? Andrew?
Yes.
Yes, and do I have a second?
Second.
Aye.
And we'll just go through, we'll do this legally because we're on Zoom. Dean? Yay or nay?
Yay.
Ashley?
Yay.
Carrie, Andrew?
Yay.
Janet?
Yeah.
John?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Meg? Glenn?
Yes.
Michael. And is he still here? And he may be on Donald.
Yes.
And myself, yay. So it is a vote, meeting adjourned at 8:29. And thank you all for attending. Thank you
Thank
for,
you.
and Judy, thank you
Thank
for your
you.
team
Good night, all.
and Patrick for all what you're doing.
No
So thank
problem.
you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you.